Hi, and welcome to this AI in C# video on the Microsoft Agent Framework. In this video, we're going to look at OpenAI Response API and more specifically the code interpreter. So let's jump into the code and our sample output and see what's going on. So I am in sample OpenAI Response code interpreter here. And this example will only work for OpenAI. Azure OpenAI will not work, but instead, if you need Azure, use the Azure AI Foundry. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make an agent like normal with the open response. And then I'm going to ask it to find top 10 countries in the world that it can do with its world knowledge, and then make a bar chart that should where each country should have its population in millions. That is not something it can do. It can only produce text, but luckily we have this code interpreter tool that I have given it here, which is essentially just a small online container that hosts some Python. So the agent are allowed to write some Python code, in this case something that generates some bar charts, and then give that back to us. So if I kick this off, it will take a little while because it's right now writing the code and running it in a small container in a sandboxed environment and coming back with that code and in our case PNG it will generate. So once it's done, we have our response back that says here's the top 10 populous countries. And then we of course need to get that image. And that is rather difficult because of a bug, but also that we need to do a little bit more. It's not like this response API just magically gives us back a PNG file. So what we need to do is we need to go in and go to our messages, which we have two of. One is the message, and the other is that it created the bar chart. And inside those, each message, we have content. And inside that content, we get some AI content. And here, had it worked, we would have had we have a code interpreter response here, which is okay. And in that, we actually see the code that we get. And then we get what container ran that code. But what we should have seen as well was an annotation. And that annotation is not present because of a bug in OpenAI's SDK. So what we are going to do instead is that whenever we find this code interpreter response, let me say a breakpoint down here, we can write out the code. That's easy. So this was the code it used to produce the system. And we could grab that and run it again if need be, but that's not really the point here. This is just the output of the tool. But to get the file, we do a little workaround here in that we get the container client from the Azure OpenAI client. So what the client can make LLM calls, but it can also work with all the other data it has. In this case, a container client. And we get the container ID here, which we can then grab the files that container created. Normally we would have gotten a file ID here and we would just directly get the file. But in our case, we need to actually grab the container files and get the files. So here we get our file. So we can see we had a PNG with a random name here. And that is the file we're gonna grab out of the container. So we get some binary data. And from here, it's just C# code where I just grab the file and make it into a temporary path on my machine. I write all the data to it, and then I'm gonna run it using Windows here. So this is what it generated for us and what I'm now showing. Had it been a website, we would of course just have shown it as an image directly on a website. But here I'm just opening it in order for us to see it. And once we have done that, we now get our annotation, but again, we can't use it for anything because it's missing the file due to the bug, but we have to work around to get this information. And in the end, we of course write out the message that we wanted. In this case, it also generated a markdown table, but that's just prompt engineering if you want that or not. And we just get our information back and our token use. And our token use is only for the input and output we gave. The tool call itself will also have a charge, and that's on the OpenAI's pricing model. And again, Azure OpenAI would fail in giving us the file back as well, but it will fail to even get it from the container. So for that reason, we can't use Azure OpenAI with the response client, but we can use the normal Azure AI Foundry, which I will make a separate video on. So with that, a little workaround for now. Once OpenAI fixes this problem, we will have a little easier time. We will get the file ID, and then we will still do this part down here. So what we could get rid of would be this at the end. But this is working, and you can grab the sample in the sample repo. But with that, thank you for attending. See you in the next one.